There is nothing more shocking and disgusting to the patriotic mind than to see the symbol of their affection for their country go up in flames in the worst way. And it is this disgust and this shocking activity, the activity of flag burning, that has been the basis of President Trump's recent executive order to increase the federal government's awareness and focus on prosecuting crimes that are in connection with flag burning. And this has caused a massive debate throughout the political spectrum on the First Amendment, free speech, patriotism, and all of these interrelated concepts. But I think what is missing from this conversation is a very close and precise analysis of the ethics of this issue, and a more even robust analysis of how the law is being applied on this issue. Because the truth is, my friends, however much we wish to act to address the objects of our disgust, the law cannot instill virtue in the hearts of men. So in this video, my friends, I'm going to go over the ethics of flag burning. I'm going to explain why this rather disgusting activity, which I object to on a personal level, I'm going to explain the different ethical dimensions of it. Then I'm going to go into why I believe that having the law try to address this issue is both a recipe for disaster and a misunderstanding of the origins of human conduct. But before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Moss. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary from a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can, my friends, to ensure our message is successful. My friends, this is a civic conservative project where we take the fundamental principles of the American founding, the moral character of the American experiment, and the values inherent in the Enlightenment, and we push them forth in our current cultural and political discourse in a way that brings forth clarity, rigor, and accessibility to those who are saddled by spectacle, distraction, and a limited thinking that is so pervasive today. So if you wish to help save America from cultural corrosion and have a kind of smarter kind of politics and a smarter kind of conservatism, then I would most certainly implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Donate if you would be so inclined. It helps me continue to bring content to you. Thank you guys so much for being here. Now, please enjoy the video. So, as many of you now know, there has been an executive order signed by President Trump that, as the posting of this video, that it has been misread as criminalizing flag burning. What it actually does, if you read the executive order, is it tells various agents of the federal government, like the Attorney General and the FBI and others, to add a special emphasis to crimes that happen to be connected with flag burning, rather than criminalizing flag burning on its own. But the conversation that has emerged over the course of this debate has been focused on criminalizing flag burning, even though that's not what's actually happening, and that has shaped the character of the conversation. And this has caused a visceral reaction from a lot of different people who are asserting the right to free speech as an objection to this, and then they are then proceeding to defy what they view as an imposition upon the right to free speech by going ahead and saying we're going to burn flags ourselves. There is a firearms company that actually went out and did this and said, we love our country, but to prove a point, we're going to go ahead and just burn the flag, and that has gotten a reaction as well. What I think these people are doing is some of the most weak-minded, some of the most reactionary, and some of the most, I think, torturous examples of what is wrong with our culture today. See, reactionism is burdened by its emphasis on the temporal. It focuses on things that immediately trigger the person who is reacting, and then throws that person into a fit of passion where they act as beasts and not as human beings, where their reason is no longer working, where their conscience is diluted by rage, where the vicious principles overtake their social nature as a human being, and being a social animal, and then throw them into action, and by doing so, inevitably makes them behave in a way that is condemnable, in a way that is short-sighted. And everyone who is burning a flag to get back at the man, so to speak, for this decision is exactly doing that. You are punishing the principle due to an action not associated with the principle, and by doing so, you have shown a rather weakness in your power to discriminate between eternal and local principles and actions, and to appreciate either. So I think all of you who are doing that are just in a very bad way, and I would implore you to go ahead and reflect rather than act. You can't act intelligibly or morally if you spend so much time not reflecting on your actual behavior. But Besides that, I do think there is an important conversation to be had here. A conversation that is not going to be satisfied by merely quoting Supreme Court precedent. Instead of quoting Supreme Court precedent and quoting the First Amendment, I'm going to quote what underlies all of those things and gives legitimacy to all of those things, and also gives legitimacy to political order, which is the natural law, the law that is written upon our hearts and is so invested and resident to our human nature that without which we would have no moral legitimacy for the Supreme Court, the Constitution, or any other law in the first place. And it is by looking at the natural law that we can shed light on flag burning, what brings forth the habit of flag burning, and how to actually counter it in a way that is amendable to justice and instead avoids the kind of pitfalls of using political power to correct what you view as disgusting. So, let us first understand that we as social animals, as I mentioned, we as human beings have duties to each other within society. And these duties are absolutely characterized by our human nature, but these duties are also colored by the communities and the nations that we exist in. Cicero, the great Roman orator and philosopher, called these communities civitas. And civitas simply means a group of citizens bound together by law and moral duty. Whenever you have a nation, you have the grand manifestation of civitas. You can't understand anything that happens in civil society without first understanding civitas, without first understanding the nature of the nation, the nature of what Cicero then called the commonwealth, and then applying that in light of the moral principles that must necessarily guide human behavior within society. So in order to ensure a strong civitas, in order to ensure actually any society is possible in the first place, fidelity must be at the forefront, because fidelity is simply that loyalty and that faithfulness we have towards others in our society, towards things and concepts as well in our society. Without fidelity, it becomes impossible to find truth. See, fidelity and truth, fidelity and veracity are the two cardinal principles that make society possible. But truth itself will fall on deaf ears if people don't trust you enough, if they don't have faith enough in your credibility in order to believe what comes out of your mouth. So in order to have a truthful society, which then turns into a just society, which then turns into a moral society, you must have a society of faith and loyalty amongst the members of it. Flag burning, my friends, when it is applied to the particular nation that the Commonwealth is in, is essentially a rejection of fidelity. It rejects the fidelity one ought to have to the universal ideas and principles that America was founded upon. It rejects the fidelity that one ought to have towards the basis of the Commonwealth and towards that kind of goodwill that is fomented by the moral character of our country. It rejects the fidelity that we ought to have towards the intellectual heritage that all of us, by virtue of being Americans, happen to inherit. And by rejecting that fidelity, we ultimately reject, in essence, our standing as citizens. Because your standing as a citizen is based entirely upon those moral principles and the duties, responsibilities, and rights that flow from those moral principles. People are incorrect in believing that citizenship is merely a legal designation or a legal privilege. Citizenship, at least in America, is fundamentally an assertion of the values you hold as an American, of the principles you hold as an American, and of the intellectual history that goes all the way back to 1776 and a little bit before that you inherit by virtue of being an American. Flag burning rejects all of that. Having said that, there is a danger in putting so much emphasis on symbols that we actually forget humanity. We actually forget the observable world. Sometimes we think the idea of America and the place of America, most importantly, is bound up in a flag that flies high above the ground. But in all reality, the idea of America and most importantly, the place of America are bound up in the people that manifest it in the real world, the people that make it possible. Sometimes, my friends, the flag should be seen as a piece of cloth that represents something, but does not contain what it represents. If the flag contained the dignity and the grace of our country, then our country would be little more than an object that can be discarded, traded, and owned by anyone, because that's what a flag can be. It can be owned by anyone, it can be traded, it can be discarded. America is so much bigger than any symbol. America is the living, breathing inheritance of the Enlightenment in the West. America is the living, breathing inheritance of a ethic, of an ethos that gives man a proper recognition of both his nature and the principles that constitute it, the rights that constitute it, and the kind of society necessary to hold government accountable and to ensure a free and good society. America is the representation of so many different things that are unique in the stream of history. And to reduce it to a flag, or to reduce it to simply national pride, is not only to debase America, it's to fundamentally misunderstand the character of America. So when it comes to flag burning, while flag burning most certainly is an offense to fidelity, flag worship is also an offense to fidelity, because to have a faith and loyalty to America is not to have a faith and loyalty to government. Is to have a faith and loyalty to the full understanding of what America actually is. And if you don't understand the nature of what you are loyal to, then you're being loyal towards an abstraction, towards an image, and not loyal to an actual thing. And this is where the ethics come in. My friends, there are two categories of behavior: what is permissible and what is preferable. What is permissible are all the things you can do under these first principles that enable society to exist, like justice and other things, and truth, so on and so forth. And what is preferable are things that you probably should do, but you don't have an ought to do them. You're not bound to do them. And to do them is to ensure a good character of society. And to not do them is to simply ensure a bad character of society, but is to also not commit a moral wrong. To commit a moral or ethical wrong, you violate a principle that society necessarily requires in order to exist. But to commit something that is not morally preferable is simply do things that offends the taste and may not lead to the best kind of society, but the society still exists. That which is preferable is not obligatory. It is preferable that we are all have fidelity, most importantly. But there are different degrees upon which our fidelity manifests. We should have fidelity to our contracts, and if we don't, that should be punished, because we made an explicit promise to honor that particular contract, and that explicit promise must have some kind of force behind it to ensure that there's corrective behavior if it is violated. But to have fidelity towards the nation is a much broader thing that is much more abstract, and being abstract and too remote of an object to understand fully, it cannot be enforced by law, because that then leads into the realm of the subjective. The moment the law becomes the tool of disgust or the tool of subjective is the moment the law loses its foundational basis in natural law. It's the moment constitutionalism is unmoored from its foundations, and it's the moment that law becomes a tool to punish whoever you don't like or punish whatever you don't like, and not a tool to actually ensure justice. In other words, law becomes tyrannical. So law cannot be a tool to shape virtue, because virtue emerges from a willful heart and a rightfully ordered context, both of which are produced by a understanding of first principles, and then a desire to align oneself with what is morally right. And to force someone to be morally good is to make someone try to imitate what is morally good out of fear of being punished, rather than to make a citizen that actually wishes to be morally good out of fidelity towards what is right. There is a big difference, and the society you get will look very different as well, depending on what you try to do to people. Flag burning, my friends, emerges from a heart tainted by resentment, which is a vicious principle, and unchecked sentiment, neither of which can be truly corrected by harsh laws or political maneuvers at all. It cannot be touched by an executive order. These are vicious principles, the sort of antithesis to our social principle, antithesis to our sociability as human beings, that can only be addressed by a strong culture of the heart, which emerges from a culture that inspires and foments character formation, which the levers of power are incapable of doing in man. Our Constitution ideally fosters in civil society a framework by which we can deal with these things in our private lives, and keeps political order away from them for the reasons I explained before. Because the moment power gets involved is the moment fear becomes the object of our concern, and not actually doing the right thing. No executive order can form character. No executive order can shape the heart. No executive order can make one want to proceed with virtue or rightful conduct. No executive order has the ability to do this. No law has the ability to do this. But man who is willing, who is enchanted by the right ideas, and is willing to go into them will be able to do this on his own accord, encouraged by a civil society that is in the same moral headspace as him. Until we get in the same moral headspace, my friends, until we reclaim the foundational ideas that make society in America possible, until we do these things, we will never have the answer to flag burning. Instead, we will simply have reactions in an attempt to make our disgust the universal standard for political action, rather than realizing that our disgust is too weak of a concept, too weak of a principle, too weak of a phenomenon to sustain anything but a temporary sensation that goes away as quickly as water recedes from the beaches into the ocean. My friends, flag burning is anti-fidelity. However, it is not an ethical wrong. And to ensure that things like flag burning don't happen, we must ensure that a culture of the heart is fomented and it is instilled, and that can only happen if we rediscover our civic soul and our civic ethos, and we push that into the cultural sphere as opposed to trying to make power the tool of that. And if you wish to do that, my friends, I would encourage you to join the Pensive cohort, especially if you're in Gen Z, where we will rigorously advocate for these pro-American, pro-Enlightenment ideas with a philosophical and accessible bent. And my friends, I'd also encourage you to like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can, donate if you wish to. It helps me continue bringing content to you. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain well and please, my friends, stay pensive. Bye.